Just before this weekend's Season 6 premiere, let's look over My Little Pony's controversial Season 5 finale, the Cutie Remark. During a speech at Celestia's School of Magic, Twilight is convinced that she saw Starlight Glimmer in the crowd, and her suspicions are proven right when she comes home to find her nemesis from the start of the season has broken into the castle and changed a time travel spell from Starswell the Bearded. As she seeks revenge against Twilight, she goes back in time to Rainbow Dash's sonic rainboom to stop it from happening, preventing the main six from ever forming their close friendship. Seeing how her actions are affecting the future for the worst, Twilight and Spike must do everything they can to stop Starlight from changing the fate of Equestria forever. This season finale is a somewhat difficult one to evaluate. In many ways, it's an excellent conclusion to another great season, but there's a fair number of aspects of it that feel very unsatisfying as well. Starlight Glimmer's time-altering spell wastes no time in kicking the episode into gear, providing us with a riveting premise that leads to a very engaging series of events. How she obtained the spell, however, is anyone's guess, and unfortunately, that's not the episode's only drawback. Once again, Starlight is shown to have an immense amount of strength and intelligence, showcasing the abilities to alter time, self-levitate, and be deviously manipulative. But the narrative never delves into how she became so powerful. The eventual backstory behind her motivation has unsurprisingly divided opinion, and while I did expect and would have liked a bit more substance, I can't be too critical of it myself, as it did leave me with a theory regarding Starlight that I will go into later on. The time travel concept was a big risk for the show and a huge challenge for writer Josh Haber, as it's an extremely difficult idea to execute correctly. And indeed, there are times where it feels like Haber is attempting to do something too big, and the episode becomes a bit overwhelmed by its own ambition. But much of the time, the concept is actually handled surprisingly well, continuously building up the suspense with each of Twilight's attempts to prevail, as the next potential future she's transported to is even more dangerous and frightening than the last. Particularly fantastic to watch is the first future, which sees Celestia and her royal guards pitted against King Sombra in a war for the Crystal Empire, and also includes Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie and Maud Pie fighting in combat. It's a daring but thrilling sequence that goes far beyond what anyone would have expected to see coming out of the show 5 years ago, truly showcasing how much more confident and bold it has become over time. The second reality, which sees Pinkie and Fluttershy as part of a rogue group of freedom fighters warring against Chrysalis and the Changelings, features a standout piece of extremely cool characterization, as it portrays Zecora as a fierce resistance leader with psychic abilities, who immediately recognizes that Twilight is not from their world. When Twilight questions how these futures can be so drastically different from their pasts, Zecora answers,
"Time is a river where even the tiniest changes seen can lead to a cascade of effects downstream."
Although it doesn't quite make up for some rather vaguely plotted exposition, this brief piece of sage wisdom from the mystical zebra is absolutely crucial to the overarching narrative, as it prevents what could have been a major story hole from forming. It makes for an incredibly smart setup, but by trying to cram numerous scenarios with different villains across the 2 episodes, each alternate future is only given a cursory amount of time to be explored. That being said, it sort of makes sense that they would be a little rushed through, as Twilight would realistically be desperate to get out of there as quickly as possible to return to her main objective, fighting Starlight. Eventually, it gets to the point where Twilight realizes that she can't defeat Starlight with force, leaving her with no choice but to show her the devastating future that her actions will end up causing. Starlight refuses to relent though, leading her to show Twilight a piece of childhood history, exploring how her only friend Sunburst acquiring his Cutie Mark first led to them being separated. This is how she came to despise Cutie Marks, long for equality, and abandon the idea of making true friendships. This eventually leads Twilight to convince her to try again, bringing the now reformed Starlight home with her to present day and taking her on as her pupil. This conclusion led to so many complaints from viewers, and I too have my issues, but they're not all exactly the same. My problem is that everything about this sequence of events feels highly rushed and anticlimactic, while most criticism seems to be directed at Starlight's backstory being weak, her reformation far too quick, and her actions being met with no punishment. I understand the point and certainly won't say their opinions are wrong, but I've come to a different interpretation. And now, here comes my theory I mentioned earlier. As fillies, Starlight and her friend Sunburst were completely inseparable, but when he got his Cutie Mark, he naturally went outside to celebrate with his family, and just like that, he was taken away to study in Canterlot. From there, Starlight let herself be alone as she never wanted to risk being hurt like that again. Many have found this to be a really petty overreaction, with even Twilight saying that it's ridiculous. I certainly understand their side of the argument and even agreed with it at one point, But then I watched the episode again and found myself looking at the story differently. This time I looked at it from Starlight's perspective. As a young and impressionable child, losing your best and seemingly only friend that suddenly can leave you feeling hurt and confused. It's a common real-life occurrence as well as a painful one, and for some it can be so traumatic and leave you with such strong feelings of doubt and confusion that it isn't so easy to pick yourself up and recover. I'd also say it's entirely possible that it may not matter how many new friends you make from there, you want your best friend back and you don't understand why that can't be, and such an experience may also eventually cause you to go off the rails. Again, it lacks thorough explanation, but with no further companions, presumably Starlight dedicated her entire life to studying magic, eventually gaining all her supreme power and never letting anything stand in the way of her desire for equality. When she is shown a vision of Equestria becoming an apocalyptic wasteland in the future, it's never stated or expressed that this was her true intention. It's just the consequences of her actions. Throughout the episode, she only exacts revenge on Twilight simply for being a threat to her dream and costing her her town, even though Twilight was completely in the right to do so. Starlight may have got what she most desired, but she got it all unethically. Yet despite this vision, she remains so wrapped up in her desire and past hatred that the message still doesn't get through to her. Because of all of this, I've come to the conclusion that I think Starlight is not so much evil, but more mentally unstable. I think a lot of this is also noticeable in her speech and body language, where her expressions of certain emotions, particularly enthusiasm and anger, seem a bit exaggerated. And something else I just noticed when rewatching these episodes, it appears that Starlight doesn't cope well with change. And I know a lot of people don't like change, but it seems to me that Starlight not only hates it, she really struggles to handle and adapt to it. And when it comes to several types of mental disorder, that's a very common symptom.
You don't know anything about me. I was perfectly happy before you and your friends ruined what I built! Because of his cutie mark. He got his and I didn't. He moved on and I didn't. Not every pony's lucky enough to get her cutie mark at the same time as her friend.
Now, does all of this excuse Starlight for her actions? Absolutely not. Despite everything being set right in the end, she still needs to be held accountable for them, and indeed, she acknowledges that and accepts full responsibility. But honestly, I would say that she needs help far more than she needs punishment. She needs help fully understanding where she went wrong and what she needs to do to make things right and gradually and eventually make a better life for herself. And this is where Twilight comes in to take her on as her pupil. And while I think she will be far better suited to a recurring role rather than being added to the group and thereby forming a main 7, I do look forward to seeing how Starlight progresses in Season 6. I know I'm probably reading way too much into this, and again, I'm not going to say that this interpretation is the right one and all others are wrong. You're obviously free to agree or disagree and stick with your own opinion, but that's what I got out of this episode. So all things considered, what are my final thoughts? Well, although I like it a lot better than most seem to, there is no denying that the Cutie remark is flawed. The time travel concept wasn't a bad idea, and Josh Hayward's execution was far from a complete disaster. It was just too ambitious for its own good, and it would have benefited from having Starlight be fleshed out a little bit more. But despite all its problems, this is still an intriguing, engaging, gripping, thought-provoking, and very enjoyable finale that's definitely worth watching at least twice. It was initially going to score a Silver Star rating of 7 out of 10, but upon re-evaluation, it did leave me with a lot to think about afterwards, and I really appreciate and admire films and TV shows that can do that. So I think it's just about good enough to get a gold star score of 8 out of 10.